Next up, Houston City Council Woman Amanda Edwards. How you doing?
Great. Got some fans in the crowd.
I see them. Thank you. Thank you.
So you are running on what you've called transformational change. Explain what you mean by that.
So one of the things that I think is interesting to dissect was the 2018 election cycle. And we saw that there were a lot of people who came out to vote who were considered to be independent voters, people who were in the middle. But we also saw that there were a number of people that registered in high numbers, but then they stayed home. And oftentimes when people do that, it's not because they're unpatriotic or they don't believe in America or they don't take their responsibility seriously. They don't see democracy actually working for them. And I'll tell you a little bit of a story. After Hurricane Harvey swept across the city of Houston, 51 inches, I had gone in and checked on some lower income senior citizens in Northeast Houston. And when I was talking to them, house after house after house that I went to, they shared with me that they weren't in need of anybody to help them get their walls mucked out or gutted out of their homes. And so I mobilized hundreds of volunteers. We went out, we were trying to connect them to resources that could help them do that. Well, when I would appear on their front doorstep, the first question they'd ask was very telling about the state of our democracy, which is, well, is it time for re-election? And so just pause for one moment. In the face of the second worst disaster in U.S. history, when you count it in terms of dollars and cents, the first question to ask when you see elected officials at your doorstep was it that you could do something for them rather than them coming to do something for you. And I think that's the key piece of this that is a pure dysfunction of where we are today, which is that people are used to people debiting from them, but not seeing transformation in their lives, not seeing any differences in their lives. And when they say, I'm going to stay home and not vote this election cycle, whether they say it out loud or not, there's some thought process there that somehow casting that vote isn't going to really make a difference. And so with our campaign, and I call it campaign, I'm going to use that term loosely, with our movement that we're building, which is predicated around people, we're looking at the issues that matter to people, but not making it a campaign speech. This has to be something where we actually deliver those results. So when I talk about transformative change, I'm talking about the things that matter most in your life: economic opportunity, access to health care, those types of real issues that can really make a difference in your life or be a matter of life or death. But not just talking about them, we have to be about delivering those results. That's how people get connected or reconnected to this democratic process, and I think that's going to be transformative and on a whole different level.
You mentioned economic opportunity.
Yes.
Texas has an inequality problem. America has an inequality problem. How would you, as senator, address what is a growing gap between the rich and everybody else?
Great question. So the haves and the have-nots. We've got to make sure that we have economic opportunity for all Texans, no matter where you live. That's key and important that everybody in the community feels that they're part of today's economy as well as tomorrow's economy. So when people, I'll use a couple of examples. When people think about what's called the future of work, which is the automation that's coming into play, the new technological advancements, there's a high level of anxiety because people don't feel like those jobs are intended for them. And so what you see is a disconnect, especially in our rural markets that are losing a lot of job opportunities. And so what we have to do is connect to people where they are, job opportunities that are actually sustainable wage-paying jobs. So when we look at, say, for example, a market in a rural community that may have had some job loss, why not incentivize business to locate some of its sustainable wage-paying back office jobs there? Those are ways to connect to people where they are In addition to that, look at inflation. The rate of inflation continues to grow, but you have not seen sustainable wages being paid to our working families. And that's key to making sure that people can afford to have one job and support their family and have access to those opportunities that everybody wants to have in order to achieve the American dream. There are a litany of things that you can proffer to make sure that people have access to economic opportunity, but the key piece of it is we've got to do more than just talk about these things. We actually have to deliver them, and we have to look at ways in which we bring all people aboard so that they can see themselves as a part of the economy and thrive.
On impeachment. So you've come out for the impeachment inquiry 2 or 3 weeks ago. We've learned, we asked this question to MJ as well. We've learned a whole lot since then.
Yes.
There's been some, self-impeachment going on with the president. We learned a lot today, though, and yesterday about the envoy and the staff and the quid pro quo. Question is, are you still in the inquiry phase, or are you, along with a majority of Americans, now in the impeachment outright camp?
Yeah, so my background, I'm an attorney by trade, and one of the key pieces, regardless of how you might feel about an issue as the facts are being revealed to you, is that you have to let the process play itself out. That's a matter of fairness, whether you're on the right side or the left side, it doesn't matter. Having those processes play out. Now, the abundance of evidence that is being accumulated at this point, I think, is showing, where we're going to head with this. But I do think it's quite dangerous if we make a decision or a determination or judgment before all of the facts have been put onto display and then, of course, appropriately reviewed. I think we're seeing the president have a disconnect between what is appropriate for maybe his business versus what you might do when you're dealing with the laws and the sovereign nation that you might be representing in the office of the White House. I think there's a disconnect there. I think that's why you're seeing him actually make certain statements that are quite damaging to his case and his plight. I don't think he understands that distinction, but I think the appropriate thing to do at this point is to allow that process to play out. Of course, as we know, there has been some obstruction of that process. And so we need to make sure that that process is being pursued appropriately. And I think we see what direction we're heading.
You see something. So another question about pathway, and the reason I keep asking everybody this is because my Annie's List team member, Gracie, who is back there. Hey, Gracie.
Where is Gracie? Okay.
She said she was going to use this evening to make her own decision about whom to support, and that she was particularly interested in each candidate's theory about their path to victory. Okay. So for Gracie's benefit.
Gracie, this one is for you. So this is a very special time. Let me start by saying this. This is a very special time where we are creating or seeing created right before our eyes a perfect storm. You have John Cornyn, who has not served the need of Texans. He's been in office since 2003, has voted against the interests of Texans, namely things like access to health care. He's voted against that half a dozen times. And so he's also moved very far to the right. And so you see him eroding away his own support. There was one poll, I think the University of Texas that Tyler did a couple of months ago, that showed him as low as 25% approval. So that's happening. The second thing that's happening is that we have somebody in the White House by the name of Donald Trump. And people are angry, people are energized, people are turning out to vote this election cycle. They understand and appreciate the seriousness of what can happen when you don't. You get 4 years of Donald Trump, maybe not 4 if this impeachment goes through, we'll see. But the point is, people are anxious about that. But The other piece of this is we had the benefit of understanding better what happened in the 18 election cycle. And what we saw with Beto, he did a remarkable job of getting persuadable voters out, people who are independent, in the middle. He got those voters to turn out in droves and support him. But when you looked at communities of color, there were high numbers of registrants, but they didn't come back out to vote in high numbers. When you look at people under the age of 35, our millennial generation, etc., they also registered in high numbers but didn't come back out to vote. So what if you can have a candidate that can get those folks in the middle, those persuadable voters, independent voters, but then also galvanize the base? And if you can do that math, build those coalitions, you will be looking at your next U.S. Senator. So I believe that we have an opportunity right here and now, but we've got to get somebody who connects with people on the level that they're concerned. And so as I mentioned to you earlier, a lot of the time when people don't vote, it's not because they're doing it in protest. They're not seeing that nexus in their lives. So if they feel like they're a touch point on a campaign, you may not see them turn back out to actually vote. You've got to demonstrate to them after they have had broken promises time and time again. We know how to make election speeches, but can we deliver on those speeches is the question we have to ask and answer. And having a candidate that has a track record of delivering results for people, who have been working in communities of color, who has been working with and alongside young people, but also whose politics will allow for people in the middle to find a connection there. I think that is what you need in order to win this election. And that's my pathway to victory.
I think most of us know in rural Texas, there's extreme shortage of physicians and psychiatrists. Hospitals are closing in droves. What would you do as senator to reverse that trend, particularly for those parts of Texas?
Yes, that's an excellent question. In fact, I think Texas now might be #1 in rural hospital closures, believe it or not. So we don't want to be #1 in that regard, but that means people are having life and death circumstances that they now face and are at risk for not getting baseline medical health services. And so it's really, really important that we look at issues like those. I think part of it tends to look at what's happening with that local economy. Part of it is about decisions that have been made, namely the fact that we have not accepted in the state of Texas the Medicaid expansion. That's problematic. That has been problematic, and we are still paying the cost. And unfortunately, many Texans are potentially paying the cost with their lives. This is truly an issue of life or death. We have got to find ways to help to rejuvenate those economies so that people become insured. So remember when I was talking about those sustainable wage back office jobs that you could be incentivizing businesses to place in rural markets where job closures and jobs have gone away? Make sure those jobs have insurance, please, so that people have opportunity to access those healthcare facilities and be insured. That's part of the pressure that is placed on rural hospitals and rural healthcare providers, is that they have such a heavy burden on those that are seeking public assistance, or Medicaid patients, or EMTALA, where they have to treat people to stabilize them, but they don't come with their insurance. And so that's not a sustainable model across a broad spectrum. And so we've got to be able to see people have workforce opportunities, but then also be insured so that these hospitals don't close and don't continue to close. The other thing I will mention to you is looking at how we can drill down on some of the costs of administration. So there's one example of a town that's actually here in Texas where they had some challenges dealing with that. And so they looked at how they could make some of those administrative positions within the hospital double up and get creative about that. But again, it's really stemming from a much larger issue, not just the hospital structure itself. It's about healthcare finance. And part of the system doesn't actually work if you are having to bear the burden of all of these folks who don't have insurance and who don't have coverage. We have got to get the state of Texas to get serious about providing health care coverage for Texans, including the fact that we have to do the Medicaid expansion and accept that.
Really briefly, if you are not the nominee.
Royce, you can't say that. Okay, so this is really hypothetical.
This is super
Okay.
hypothetical. This is imaginary. If you're not the nominee, will you pledge to support the Democratic nominee?
We absolutely have to stick together as Democrats. Absolutely. There is far too much at stake than for us to allow the outcomes of a primary election to make us face another 6 years of someone named John Cornyn, who, since I've been running, go ahead and clap. If you guys are
When you say
Since
6 years like that, that's such a long time.
It's such a long time. And I will tell you, in the 3 months that I've been running, there have been 2 mass shootings on this watch. And we have watched him say things like, it's complex. Well, I've got news for those that might think that this work is too complex. You may not be the right fit for the job. When we think about issues like access to health care coverage, that's personal to me. When I was growing up, my dad had cancer. He got diagnosed when I was about 10 years old, and he passed away from it. But I learned about the U.S. healthcare system by being the inquisitive young person that I was and asking my dad a whole bunch of questions. He was, at that time, getting experimental stem cell treatment, and that was, kind of Jetsons to me. And I would ask him questions like, well, what happens about this insurance? What if they say no? And then my dad said, oh, well, we'd have to figure that out. And I said, well, what if somebody can't figure it out? And knowing the fact that at the end of that inquiry, the answer is it's really a life or death issue for people, we have to have leaders in place that understand and appreciate it, and who will act with urgency so that we don't lose lives in the balance. John Cornyn has voted against the Affordable Care Act 6 times. That's somebody who puts a premium on playing politics with people's lives and treating it like a political chip in a political game. And I think that it's high time that we pick people and their interests over the politics. And it's time that we have a new wave and a new generation of leadership in our country.
Thank you.